Hey everybody, welcome. And yeah, it's still going to feel like Groundhog Day, but we're going to go with a roller coaster theme today because this crazy ride keeps going. So I brought some cotton candy bang to the party just to make me think of amusement parks that are sitting idle right now. And we will dive into more questions on the ever changing twists and turns of the PPP and what may be coming down the pike, as well as some of the deadlines that are approaching. And so for everybody that is joining us right now, if you would use the Q&A button to hit us with questions. And again, of course, you can continue to harass us, make comments about the deer and the really nice antlers on that deer behind Adam as you see him when he starts talking. And so I'm going to pass it. I think I'm going to pass it over to you, Jack, first. Hey, good morning, Joe. Thanks for chiming in on this. I'm going to pass it over to Jack as he's got some thoughts on what may be coming down the pike, and it'll probably be safer to have him talk about it than us and get ourselves in trouble. So go ahead, Jack.
Sure. So not a whole lot to be able to share with everyone definitively, because really they just started back into this stuff in DC this week. And so I can share with you a little bit of speculation and on two issues and some other interesting quotes and other news and different perspectives. So there's kind of two things that are being focused on, so it seems. One is the $150,000 forgiveness. And I'll go through some of that in a minute, but then there's also the use of the unused $130 billion money that's still out there, and how can they repurpose that by making it easier or going through a second round. And so you have, if you're not familiar with how things work on Capitol Hill, and I'm not an expert in that by any means, but you have different constituencies or different groups. Sometimes it's bipartisan, usually it's not, and throwing things out for consideration, different committees and everything else. And so, trying to merge those thoughts and those concepts together, I mean, that's kind of the beginning process of getting this stuff done. And so what happens is that, and then you have people that like seeing themselves in front of television or being quoted. So then you get bits and pieces of what some of those programs are, but usually not the entire picture, because no one person or group is going to make everyone happy in any program that they put together. So a couple of pieces of information and some rumors and other things. So in one of the articles I read, there was discussion about the banker's perspective, and that none of the bankers regret participating in the loan program, but they're worn out when borrowers keep asking them when their loans will be forgiven. And that is not just when, but when they can actually begin the process with the banks. And then there's another quote from a banker that said, "This is a community service. With the amount of time and how we've had to change the structure of our bank to produce these loans, it's not a profitable business." So another interesting quote. This is a perspective, as I said, that there are provisions out there to reinvigorate the PPP program by providing opportunity for businesses that went through the program once, and to extend out the amount of funding to cover a longer period than was originally anticipated. So in a prior conversation that we had here in this forum last week or 2 weeks ago, there was speculation whether it'd be we close out the first program and move on to a second program with its own set of money, its own set of rules. This person seems to believe it would be an extension under the same rules moving forward. There was another comment that, let's see, where is that? This is the first time that the government has, there are very few, if any, programs in the history of loan programs where you've essentially operated off of FAQs. It's foreign territory for the banking industry to operate in that type of environment. And so that goes into the conversation of, the banks are really concerned about, first of all, the logistics of going through the forgiveness program. So if you can say anybody who has less than 150,000, let's just say they're done, that would be awesome. And so that's the benefit to the banks, but they want to make sure that that's great, but they'll do that only if they can't get in trouble. If they get a get out of jail card, or not even go to jail card provision in there that says, okay, all you have to do is make sure that there's a driver's license that is associated with the lender, whatever it may be, so it's very minimalistic, and get through that. And then so you have the responses that there's potential for waste and fraud when awarding and later forgiving these loans. Businesses that don't need assistance receiving essentially free taxpayer money, but more importantly, our smallest, most vulnerable businesses being prevented from getting the help they need. And so putting all these things together, the roadmap seems to, and one more caveat, that you have 130 trade associations and other businesses that are pushing for this $150,000 automatic forgiveness. And the statistic on that is that they said expediting this loan forgiveness will save more than 7 billion in hours of paperwork. That's kind of stating the obvious. 7 billion is pretty significant. So what I think that means is, I'm sorry, one more statistic, which we've talked about before. $150,000 threshold is a sweet spot because it would cover more than 86% of the $4.9 million loans issued under the program. So putting all those things together, the goal is to put more money out there to make it easier to forgive a lot of the number of loans because they're under a certain dollar amount, and to try to get things back to normal as far as the economy goes, and not have this after effect of this loan forgiveness and people getting in trouble because they didn't do it right, meaning the banks, those kind of things. So that's kind of where we're going with those kind of things. And I'll stop there because that's, I think, sufficient number of items in the rumor mill of what's going on that I can share with you.
Adam, you have any thoughts or things that you've been saying in the last week that you want to address before we go into questions? And just FYI to everybody on the call, and a few more people are still coming on here, but we are going to top this thing off at high noon, and that is in Eastern time zone, not in Oklahoma Central time zone, as that deer is waving and winking his eye at me right now. So that would be 11 o'clock Central time zone. So Adam, any thoughts?
Yeah, a couple things. So yes, that is, I'm in my uncle's shop in Blackwell, Oklahoma. So this is his little office section of the shop, and that is a deer behind me that he shot at some point in the distant past. The white structure that you see to my right is a tornado shelter, in case anybody's never seen a tornado shelter that you can build inside of a house. That is one. So anyway, yeah, so the only things that I would really add to Jack's commentary is that, the Senate debate today, I'm sure that we'll find out more this evening after they've already had some talks and made their press announcements and commentary. But, the couple things that jumped out at me, one is the round two for people who have already received funding. I mean, that seems to generally, make some sense, I think, based on what we're seeing on the ground. Either that or, people that have exhausted funds that still can't open are still in a pickle, and those people would just end up on unemployment, I think, otherwise, because people would end up changing what their business plans are if they didn't think that there was a second round of funding coming down. The second is they talked about some additional enhanced credits and incentives for people to keep people employed or to bring people back on payroll. I'm really curious to see what those are. One of the things that we've talked about in past webinars is that it's not definitive in terms of what's the actual interpretation of the law. All that we have is the Department of Treasury's guidance right now, but the Treasury guidance or the IRS guidance is that if you receive PPP funds and you're still paying people after they're exhausted that are otherwise out because they're taking care of kids or other reasons that are pandemic related, which is really relevant, especially since CMS isn't effectively going back to school. So we're just, we're back in March, all over again in terms of what's got to be done. And the realities are, you can't have kids at home. I'm sorry, but you cannot have kids at home and still look me in the eye and tell me that you put in a full load. It's just not, it's not possible. Now you could make up the time, somewhere else potentially, but I just think that we just need to acknowledge that that's impossible to get done during the day. And there are other reasons, if you don't have kids, that it might be impossible, but with kids, it's going to be impossible for you to, really put in a full-time day working from home while you still got to take care of kids. Even if you're going to work and you've got, other arrangements, you're still going to have a weird schedule, I think, relatively speaking. So realities are, we are paying for people to not work a full load. That's just reality. So to not qualify for the FMLA credit because we already received PPP funds just doesn't seem, doesn't seem right, because the other possibility would have been to reduce somebody's pay to cover what they're not working. So I hope they do something on that front. With respect to, what Jack said about the roadmap, I do agree with him that, hey, this seems to be headed towards, hey, people who didn't receive the first, couldn't receive funds in the first round for whatever reason, they couldn't receive them. The challenge that I'm going to see with that, though, is it's not, the people that didn't receive funds at this point are people that didn't have banking relationships or otherwise could not prove that they actually had income in 2019. So it's really hard for me to envision a scenario where, whether you're Republican or Democrat, they basically just say, write down on the form what you'd like, and here you go. I don't know. I mean, they would have to change some of the rules in terms of the application process, I think, to get money to people that otherwise didn't receive it. Because I'm, granted, my sphere is Charlotte, so I don't know a whole lot of what happened outside of the greater Charlotte area. And, my second sphere is really, our client base. But within our client base, unless somebody's going to blow us up on the chat right now and tell me that I'm full of it, I'm pretty sure that anybody that was trying to get something, they could meet the criteria of proving that they had income, ended up getting it. And I think that would trickle down representatively. And I think the proof is in the pudding, and the fact that there's still $150 billion sitting in the fund. So I think, before people get really excited about that, they didn't receive funding because they couldn't, prove something that needed to be proved, they're going to have to change the rules, because I don't see them just, if they just say there's round two and we're targeting small businesses, but you don't change the underlying application criteria, I think the same people that I know of didn't receive funding are going to be in the same boat they were before.
Yeah, and I would say that that logic works in the sense that what I've seen in the press and reading articles and on the news is that the perspective is, hey, we let the federal government and the president run with this and sprint because we had to react quickly. But moving forward, it's going to be theoretically a more methodical, and it's gonna, the abuses that did occur because we were in such a rush and we threw something out there that had a lot of holes in it, and we were patching the holes as we went on over the course of the weeks and weeks. That's not going to happen again. And so you have and again, not to be political, but I mean, it's just the way it is. You have mostly Democrats that are saying, not so fast this time. We let you run with it the first time and the second time, but now we're going to slow it down and make sure that people who didn't get a bite at the apple get that bite at the apple, and those people that did bite at the apple but maybe didn't need it or don't need the next round, but technically would qualify under the current rules if those were implemented. So everything that Adam said is accurate from what I am reading and seeing in the media with respect to how the next round could go.
Something that I'll interject in this too is I know of a couple business owners, one that has ties into South Africa. They opened up a restaurant right before COVID hit here in Charlotte. They didn't think that they would qualify because of their green card status and a number of other things, but we found that actually they can. And so Brian Red is helping them from Pinnacle Bank. And this is not a Pinnacle Bank plug by any means, but they still have the gate open, I think, until the 8th of August. I know of another bank that said they're shutting the gate on the 4th of August. Then we also have a builder that didn't think he would qualify, kind of sat silent. We were like, oh no, wait a minute, actually you can. So we know that there are still some of those that are getting in dribs and drabs, but the fact that, August 8th is coming up sooner rather than later, and anybody out there that's listening and knows of somebody, if you're talking about it and they haven't applied, the gates are still open, and it might be worth doing even under the old guidelines. So Adam, you've already addressed this, but I'm going to read the question anyway, because I told David from Clean Juice. By the way, thank you, Clean Juice. We love you. This is what he said. So he couldn't be on this call, so he sent this email. Said, can you advise on whether there's any thing of potential interest for our owners, like another chance for more PPP loans that they should be aware of in the latest pending legislation? So I said, hey, we'll ask the question. I think you guys have already addressed it. Anything that you would add to what you've already stated?
Well, I think I'm going to win the Jack Award for repeating the most Jackisms in this call. I mean, documentation. I mean, if something passes around a second round for people that have already received round one, you got to believe that you're going to have to prove your case, because the funding level, I think, from what I saw, was only 90 billion. I mean, that's less than a third of what the original funding package was. So they're building in not funding as much for the second round. So, figuring out how you're going to prove your case, I think, is going to be pretty important. I do believe there probably will be a second round for people that already received round one, because of the fact that people are going backwards in terms of the shutdown. But, you're going to have to prove your case. We don't know what the case is yet, but you have to assume it's probably going to be, somewhat lost revenue driven.
One other thing before we move into some more of these questions, we talked last week about, hey, is there any guidance on GAAP on how to book this stuff? And we do have 4 kind of simple bullet points that we got from one of our audit partners at the firm. And I'll just read those if you want me to, Adam, unless you've got them.
Yeah. So, I think that the guidance is consistent with what we've said in past webinars, is that, you book a liability, keep on coding the expense accounts like you code the expense accounts. And when the loan is forgiven, you relieve the liability on the balance sheet with the debit, and then your credit is another income item that'll get disclosed in the balance sheet. I think that, the question is, well, what do you do for interim reporting to banks? My advice would be add it in as another item for your covenant calculation, and then let the bank remove it, as long as you're transparent in that. So at least you're having a dialogue around, whether you're passing or you're failing, or you need a covenant modification.
All right, cool. I'm going to go into questions here. This one is, it says, I know I can apply for forgiveness before the 24 weeks, assuming I use that period. And the one thing that I would say that is every bank that I know said, don't ask us for applying for forgiveness until after August 8th. And that was reiterated in Jack's part of his diatribe on the front end. but it says, do I still have to keep my FTE numbers regardless through that period? I realize any pay reductions beyond 25% per employee still carry out, but it was not clear on the FTE count. Thanks.
By letter, I mean, the way that it would read now is that within your covered period, which in this case would be 8 weeks, I'm assuming based on the nature of the question. So I've hit my FTE requirement for the 8 weeks, ask forgiveness, but it's outside of the 8-week window. Then in theory, you would be fine if your FTE count had otherwise been reduced. All that said, I would be prepared to have the exception ready to go in the event that you are at a reduced FTE count beyond your covered period. And even if you're beyond your covered period and you're saying, well, I'm applying even though it's 24 weeks, it's only been 12 weeks, I still think in this case, you're going to have, if you don't meet the FTE count, you're going to have your exceptions ready to go. Because remember, you don't have to hit the FTE count if you otherwise qualify for an exception. Exceptions being, I try to find a suitable replacement, none can be found, person won't come back even though I've offered because they're worried or they otherwise have something they have to care for, or I have enough of a disruption that was, somehow government or CDC guidance related that I just don't have the business to support the position anymore.
All right, next question is, I'm confused how to use the $46,000 number when going from 8 weeks to 24 weeks. Obviously, I only received $15,385 for a $100,000 plus person. Please explain how this number comes into play regarding forgiveness.
Well, so for the people that weren't going to be deployed, were going to be able to deploy the funds over the 8-week period because they couldn't hire people back because they didn't have the revenue. That's why they created the 24-week period. So the math really is you pay less people, $6,000 number. So in that scenario, you either would have to rehire everybody at the end of it or otherwise qualify for an exception. But the reason for the math is that it's implying that you reduce down to a skeleton crew and you're just paying that skeleton crew for a longer period of time because you weren't able to reopen to full capacity.
All right, thank you. Next question is, knowing that PPP funds can't be used for paid FMLA, is it possible to have your entire loan forgiven if you have employees that went out on paid FMLA during your covered period?
Well, just clarification on that. It can be used for paid FMLA. You just can't also apply for the FMLA tax credit.
Good delineation. Next question is, were PPP loan forgiveness applications extended for all recipients? We received ours on May 8, but BB&T has not sent a link for the application yet.
You take that one, Jack?
Yeah, so it's the forgiveness application, submitting it has been extended, but the bottleneck is the bank, or are the banks, whether they are accepting them in the first instance or they're accepting them and putting them in a bucket that is in the corner of the room until they feel better about processing those applications.
Yeah, just hearsay. I've got a friend who's a client of BB&T, and they received a lot of money from PPP, and they've got everything kind of ducks in a row. And they said that they wouldn't start accepting until, I think, early in August as well too. So I think that August 8 kind of time frame seems to be somewhat uniform. So this is a clarification to an earlier question. The point is that I can choose 24 weeks, but apply early. Can I cut back on staff after applying? For example, if it took 10 weeks to spend the money, so we want to use the 24 weeks, but just keep FTE through the date of application forgiveness.
You're in an interpretive area that is not clear. And I would be, and again, normally aggressive Adam would have, you know, obviously I don't shy away from offering my opinion, but this is one where I don't think I'd mess around on this one. I'd either go 8 or 24, period. Because the issue that you get into is that if you use the money over a 12-week period, first off, it's not $46,000 anymore. It'd be, you know, 12 50 seconds of $100,000, but there's no, you know, there's nothing that actually says that's okay. So, you know, I think it's either 8 or 24 at this point is what I've been advising all of our clients. I don't know about you, Jack.
Yeah, and I think I know the person who is asking this, so I'm adding him to the speakers bucket. So I think that in theory, if you read it, it says, okay, that you can apply for forgiveness or you can apply at any time. But I don't think that the process lends to or is in congruence with that, because you have to make certain certifications for a period of time that you can't make unless you go, I think, all the way through the 24-week period, regardless of the fact of if you've used all the money. And so, you know, again, I haven't gone through the various scenarios of the what ifs and everything else, but I don't think it's possible on the forms to make all of the certifications that you need to if you don't go the full period of time, whether it's 8 or 24 weeks. And so, but I can't tell you I can't answer your question definitively, other than instinctually, you know, and we've had this question before, somewhere between 8 and 24, where, you know, that particular client or is at week 12 or 14, can we go ahead and push the button on that? And I, as far as I know, I don't think you can. And I have not been told or informed differently about that. And if I do get informed differently about that, one way or another, then definitely will share with this group.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, to be clear on the point that Jack and I are making, you know, you're either spending the money in 8 weeks or you're spending the money in 24 weeks. So if you're on the 8-week period, but you apply 12 weeks later, but you're still using the 8-week period, that's probably gonna be okay. It's that I had to use longer than 8 weeks, but I didn't have to use the full 24. That is the, there's not any guidance on how you'd even fill out the application of forgiveness to even do that at this point. So if you did do something with it, I mean, you can just kind of play this process out. It then hits the bank underwriter and they go, I don't understand. They were supposed to put either 15.5 here, they're supposed to put 46, instead they put 22. Or I don't understand, they put 46, but it hasn't been 24 weeks. I just, you know, I think mechanically, as Jack said, it's just not, until there's something else that comes out, it's just not even really possible to submit the application.
Any other questions out there, hit the Q&A button. I did get this in via email, and this is more probably a public service announcement, but this is actually from Brian Red over at Pinnacle. And I'm not trying to show favoritism here. He's just been on it from proactive communication. So they are going to be starting applications for PPP forgiveness at Pinnacle Bank. Lots of changes with it. He's got a webinar coming up on the 24th to talk further about getting ready to apply. So that is going to be at 3 p.m. Eastern time, Friday the 24th. If somebody wants to know more about that, ping me at gfrey@trustbgw, and I'm happy to forward that to you. I will not be on it. I've got a meeting that day tomorrow at that same time, but nonetheless, they're going to be providing some pretty good insights. And so I think whether you're with Pinnacle Bank or not, I think that could be valuable to just see what's going on in the minds of the banks so that you're ready to apply. I think being prepared is the most important thing right now. Any other thoughts from you, Adam or Jack?
Well, to make sure our viewers get their money's worth today, I found an article that I had read, and I had, of course, at about 10:59, hit the close button, and I had to find it. So it's an article. I don't know if it was published in the Charlotte Business Journal, because what I'm looking at was in the Washington Business Journal, but a few interesting pieces of information. This article came out a couple of days ago, and what I didn't know is that Senator Ben Cardin, who's a Democrat from Maryland, he's the one who's primarily quoted in this, that he on June 18th, and this kind of goes to where our lawmakers in Congress have been in this process, going all the way back to June 18th, he introduced, and we talked about this a little bit, the Prioritized Paycheck Protection Program, or P4 Act, that would take the so far unused $130 billion in original funding to authorize a second PPP loan for small businesses with fewer than 100 employees that have been disproportionately harmed by the COVID-19 pandemic. And then the comment that clear interest from both sides of the aisle to have a second round that targets those who are in need. The first round was to get money out quickly, and we think it was successful. The second round, we want to target those businesses that are in real need, and that a next phase of relief should extend the PPP, but on a more targeted basis for smaller companies, hard hit, and they gave some examples of what those industries are. And so another program, and something that we really hadn't talked about, I was thinking about a few minutes ago as we were going through all this as to what is next. We really haven't been talking about the EIDL program as much. And so, you know, there's no strict prohibition against someone who got PPP funds to go get an EIDL loan. So keep that in mind. If you haven't looked into that, that is a potential resource as well. And especially after this comment, that they may take some of the money and boost the resources for the EIDL program. And so they may be dumping some more money into there, which, given the comments that we've said previously, that the banks are not really aggressive or anxious or desirous of continuing to participate in the PPP program necessarily, just because of the low interest rate, the low return on their investment, essentially. The EIDL program may be more lucrative for bankers. So that may be the way to go next, is that maybe there's money there that you've not tapped into. So I would recommend that you look into that if that's something that you haven't looked into yet.
All right, next question is, can you speak a moment about payroll taxes? We haven't paid ours for the first quarter.
So payroll taxes have a couple different components. You know, one is the federal withholding, that's the employee's money, which has their income tax withholding, federal and state. And then you've also got their portion of Social Security taxes. That's the employee payroll taxes. Then there is the employer payroll taxes, which are the employer match on Social Security and FICA. The only thing that's actually okay at this point with respect to payroll is on the employer side, which is effectively 7.5%. You can defer those even if you receive PP funding, PP forgiveness to the end of the year. And then it's, you know, doing two tranches, half at the end of this year, I believe, half at the end of next year. that's okay. But the trust portion of the tax, which is the employee part that you're withholding, so that's Jack's money that I took from Jack, that's not okay at this point, in terms of not remitting that unless you're applying for the FMLA tax credit to your employee retention credit and are already worked through that with your payroll provider. So if you've been doing that, you really ought to get on some form of payment plan with the IRS, or otherwise, get it paid back on your next reporting period. Otherwise, you're going to start stacking up some pretty severe penalties and interest associated with it. And none of the relief bills that we've seen, that are pending, nobody's proposing that it's okay to just never pay Jack's money. Like, all of the pending legislation is more on the employer side, not the employee side, which is still great, but it's not, they want Jack's money going to Jack on Jack's behalf, not me. So that if they do something on the withholding side, that'd be new, and they've never done something like that, in my knowledge.
Yeah, and I would say that a kind of tangential perspective is that, and I've explained this to clients who have said, well, I've collected this money and I'd like to maybe give myself a short-term loan. I'll eventually pay it to the government. The government doesn't like that. They basically view you as an owner, as an employer, as a trustee on behalf of the federal government. You are pulling money out of someone's paycheck that is supposed to go to the government. And it's just an interim step that you are the one that is doing it and paying it. And so they really don't like it when you hold on to that money. They especially don't like it when you spend it. And that's where you look into, if those of you who get the Business Journal and you go towards the back and you see these federal tax liens, you'll see many of them are for failure to pay, in many cases, the payroll tax. It could be other quarterly taxes or whatever it may be, but a lot of times you will see that there is a judgment or a lien for failure to pay those funds that you promised the government you were going to pay to them because you pulled them from your employees' money, essentially.
Yeah, when clients ask about that, I mean, it really is, the financing source of last result. So what I always tell people, and this is no offense to alternative-based lending because it does have a place, but factoring and payroll tax is the place that you go before you die. So just, if you're in the boat where that's your last course of financing, I think you got to ask some other questions of yourself.
So again, any other questions, hit the Q&A button. And this just came in from Richard, said, thanks to you, Adam and Jack, for holding these forums for the past several months. They've been very informative. Would you please forward me the webinar info from Pinnacle Bank? I just did to you, Richard, and anybody else that's on here. Again, I'm at gfrey@trustbgw.com. gfrey@trustbgw.com, and I'll be happy to forward that Pinnacle Bank webinar. Again, whether you're a client of theirs or not, I think there's probably going to be some good information on just having stuff that is ready and buttoned up in the way that the banks are going to want to see that, to make that as pain-free as possible. Any other questions out there? We've still got a few minutes left before the crack of noon Eastern time. But we don't need to belabor this if there are no other questions. It sounds to me like there will probably be more things coming down the pike, more twists and more turns to this roller coaster by next week. And we will plan on being back here, same bat channel, same bat time, Thursday at 11 o'clock Eastern. We will have this up on YouTube later on this afternoon for anybody that wants to send it to an insomniac or something like that. So anything else there before we go? Thank you for participating. Oh, here we go. Okay, here we go. Thanks, Tim. Any comments on additional SBA deferment or other options with the SBA?
I have not seen anything in the Senate bill or pending Senate legislation, or I don't think there was anything in the House legislation either that had a deferral beyond the 6 months. It was already, when I say deferral, the forgiveness that was already granted with the 6 months. I'm assuming you're speaking to the traditional 7(a) lending program with that. I haven't seen anything beyond what's already in place, which is 6 months automatic forgiveness.
And Gary, there's something I was thinking about. Adam brought this up, kind of in the background of, I think, what will be part of the considerations of the next set of funds has to be, you know, here we are getting towards the end of summer, school starting to ramp up or supposed to ramp up. What are you going to do in situations, different scenarios where, and my employment law partners have been dealing with this for months now, but I think that's also going to increase, where you have people that are trying to find a way to do it all, which is work from home, homeschool their kids, you know, do all these things, and yet look to their employers for grace and mercy in the form of either paying or not terminating them. And there have been some cases for us that, interestingly, a doctor's note appears that for whatever reason, this person can't come to work. Recently it was, hey, show us the doctor's note. And then there was an appointment made. We were notified of a doctor's appointment being made for 2 days, 48 hours later down the road. So, you know, there are those issues that are going to come up. But my point is that, you know, how is the federal government going to help those employers that are facing that situation where, you know, they if the goal has been and continues to be twofold. One is to put money in people's pockets in order to survive, and the other is to ease the burden on employers and businesses in one form or fashion, which it could be subsidize those employees who have less have reduced work for whatever reason, or give them the opportunity to go on unemployment and as part of the stimulus package, and do what they did with adding the extra money to state unemployment packages. Although we've seen what happens in some cases where it's more beneficial for someone to sit around on the couch and get a paycheck versus actually going back to work. Obviously an unintended consequence, but the reality of what happened because of the way the program was implemented and managed. So I think we're going to have a lot of non-financial issues work their way into financial issues for businesses and for individuals. And we're just, you know, again, I believe, this is a Jack opinion, that, you know, we just really haven't seen the impact of that because we were already kind of gearing towards summertime where we knew kids were going to be at home. And now the expectation is, well, wait a minute, where is my 9-month daily babysitter? You know, they're not accepting people on campus. So what are we going to do about that? So anyway, just for a commentary on what Adam said.
Yeah, I'll, you know, live example. Thanks, Jack, for opening up the soapbox for me to go ahead and stand on and start screaming about. That, you know, just this is just real life for, you know, BGW. Yeah, you know, we have pretty close to this exact same scenario. It's just more relevant because wife and I were hanging out with a friend, or we were picking up some stuff from a friend of hers that has a kindergarten. So Zoom class for kindergarten is called videotape your child tying their shoes 25 times and then send it to me. Do this arts and crafts project and video yourself while doing it so that I can see that it was done by the child. That's not the same as the boatsman kid sitting at the kitchen table. You know, hey guys, you need to be dialed into your class. But at the same time, in this next round of CMS, I will remind everybody, I want to say it's like 100 minutes of instruction time that has to happen. each day. So round 2 of CMS, Zoom instruction will not be as passive and lax as round 1 of CMS study. So, you just have to assume that it's going to require more time. Like it already required a lot of time from the parents if you had really little kids. But if you have, middle school to, teenage years kids, like, I do, or a lot of other people in BGW world do, you're pretty well, it's going to get a lot more intense than it was before. And, right now, as far as I know, a couple private schools have talked about opening, some of the religious schools have talked about reopening. It's going to take one outbreak before they're all shut down. So you got to assume nobody's going to be in business, for the first semester at least. Okay, so what does that mean for BGW? Okay, well, the person that has to stay at home, probably cannot produce as many tax returns as the person that does not. So we're faced with a choice. Either A, ask the person that doesn't have to stay home to do more work. Well, that sucks for that person. Or B, ask the person at home, staying at home, to just make up the time somehow, which may or may not be possible. That sucks for that person. Well, I could ask the person that's staying at home, to take a pay cut, I suppose, to subsidize the temporary person that I have to hire to do that person's work. They can come in, because you know what I know? I know that the same amount of tax returns still have to get freaking done. So, it's a three-legged stool whereby what I have to do and the time that it has to be done is fixed. My only variable is the resource bucket, but I just got a resource constraint that just happened. So it is really a very real scenario that, and we're considered, essential. I get that why we're considered essential, but we don't have to force people to go to the office for that. But it's just a very real scenario that a lot of people are facing right now. To Jack's point, that conundrum of, well, I mean, that's coming from somewhere. It's either coming from, the company, or it's coming from the government, or it's coming out of the employee's back. Either by having to work more or take reduced pay to otherwise subsidize, or to hire, somebody to come in place and help out. So it's just, it's all real stuff that, I hope doesn't get lost on the folks that are debating what the stimulus should actually look like.
And on a parental note, for those of you that stayed on with us today, I'm about to give you one of the best pieces of advice that any parent could give another parent who has kids that are doing math in the algebra geometry zone. If you have not discovered this app called PhotoMath, and what I'm about to tell you, feel free to send me, many gift cards to Target or whatever, because I have just saved you a ton of time and effort and frustration. It's called PhotoMath, and it will use a QR scanner in your phone, and it will take like 3x minus y equals 6. Okay, it will solve the problem for you. It will graph the line. It will tell you where the y-intercept is, where the x-intercept is. Do you guys remember what happens, what a graph looks like when you take x squared, when you square a variable? Do you remember what that looks like? Apparently, and I found this out a couple years ago, it arcs because it goes back upon itself. So for those of you, like I said, check it out. Make sure your kids aren't using it to do it in the first place. This is a parental tool, but they have access to it unless you lock them out of it. But so there you go. I just made your entire school year so much easier.
Thanks, Jack.
See, that was the lucky strike extra for anybody that made it to the end of this webinar broadcast. We always want to give you something more. So thank you, Jack, for doing that. Joe, thank you for being a cheerleader for us. It's always good to see you on here too. We had a few more people that asked us to forward. So Sandra, Mark, and Mary, check your inboxes. I've done that while these guys were opining. I think we have answered all the questions that have been asked of us so far. And if you have more, feel free to hit us up, especially on FAQ at trustbgw.com for PPP stuff. For math stuff, just look up Jack, find him, and he's your math guru. But for PPP questions until next week, feel free to hit FAQ at trustbgw.com. Be back here again, because we don't want this to just be an echo chamber of us talking and having fun. Thank you for taking time out of your day. We appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Adam. And thank you, Bambi. It's not Bambi. I don't know. Buck back there on the wall. So thank you. Have a safe trip back here, Adam, when you get back. So, one other question here. Oh, nope, just a statement. You do the same. Joe, you have a good weekend too. Thank you again, everybody.
See you guys.
We'll post this up later on today. Bye-bye.
Thank you.